The Whispering Portrait by Silas Holloway. I've spent years collecting accounts of strange objects and the damage they leave behind. Most of the time, the stories are easy enough to dismiss. A trick of the mind, a product of loneliness, or simply rumor passed along until it grows teeth. But sometimes, when enough people describe the same thing across decades, I pay closer attention. One such case has stayed with me, a portrait. Nothing more than oil on canvas, yet wherever it appeared, it left the same pattern of paranoia, broken relationships, and whispered lies. The painting changed hands many times, resurfacing again and again after being discarded. What follows are 3 separate testimonies from people who claim to have lived with it. They never met, never spoke to one another, but their stories are consistent in one unsettling detail. The portrait didn't stay silent. Account 1. I came across the portrait in the early 90s, back when I was still living in Tucson. I wasn't looking for art, not really. I was just at this estate sale, the kind where you can wander through the whole house picking over the scraps of a stranger's life. Most of it was junk, old dishes, faded rugs, the kind of furniture that smells of dust and age. Then I saw it leaning against the wall in one of the back bedrooms. It was a portrait of a man, or at least I think it was. The face was pale, drawn long, with a sharp nose and eyes that seemed too dark for the rest of the painting. There was no signature, no date, no frame. Just canvas stretched tight, edges curling slightly with wear. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to it. The kind of pull you get when you see something strange and can't quite put your finger on what's wrong with it. I bought it for $10, carried it home like it was something special. Hung it right there in the living room, above the couch. At first it was just a painting, nothing more, but after a few nights I started to notice things. Not in any dramatic way, just oddities. Like I'd be sitting in the room and I'd swear the shadows around the portrait were heavier somehow. Or I'd glance up and the expression on the painted face seemed different than I remembered. Not a smile, exactly, but the faintest curve of the lips, like someone trying not to laugh at me. Then came the whispers. The first time, I was half asleep on the couch. I woke thinking the TV had turned itself back on. But the sound wasn't coming from the set. It was low, a hiss threading through the silence. I couldn't make out words at first. Only the rhythm of speech. By the third night, the words became clear enough to understand. It told me my brother had been stealing from me, that he'd come by one afternoon while I was at work and gone through my things. I didn't believe it, not at first. My brother and I were close. But the painting repeated it night after night, its voice dry and patient, like someone dripping poison one drop at a time. I started noticing things I hadn't before. A 20 missing from my wallet. A box of old records out of order. My brother had a key, so maybe it wasn't impossible. When I confronted him, he laughed, said I was imagining things, but the seed had been planted. Every time I looked at him, I wondered. It didn't stop there. The portrait whispered about my girlfriend next, said she'd been lying to me, seeing someone else when I was at work. I tried to ignore it, but once again, little details began to gnaw at me. The way she'd answer the phone in the other room, the way she avoided my eyes when she was late coming home. I found myself watching her, suspicious, angry. The portrait fed on that. It told me I couldn't trust anyone, that the people closest to me were plotting against me, laughing behind my back. By then, I was barely sleeping. I'd sit in the dark living room with the portrait above me, listening to its rasping voice until dawn. One night, I took it down, threw it in the closet, shut the door tight. But the whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew sharper, more insistent. I'd lie in bed and hear them through the wall, telling me to look closer, to face the truth about the people I loved. The breaking point came during an argument with my girlfriend. I accused her of cheating, of lying to my face. She swore she wasn't, but I could barely hear her over the sound of the portrait whispering from behind a closed door. It felt like it was right there in the room with us, egging me on, smiling through the painted face I couldn't see. I grabbed the canvas out of the closet and dragged it outside. I didn't even bother with the trash. I left it leaning against the streetlight a block away and walked home without looking back. That night, the house was silent for the first time in weeks. My girlfriend left me soon after. Said she couldn't live with someone so paranoid and angry all the time. My brother stopped visiting too. I couldn't blame them. The portrait was gone, but the damage it did lingered. To this day, I wonder if it was telling the truth or if it simply wanted me alone. Account 2. I found the painting by accident. It was the summer of 2003, I think. I had just moved into a new apartment complex outside of Denver, and I was still getting used to the neighborhood. I'd walk every evening just to get out, to stretch my legs after work. One night, I passed the dumpster behind the building, and there it was, leaning against the side, like someone had tried to throw it out but didn't bother to push it inside. It wasn't beautiful, not in any conventional sense. A man's face, pale and angular, with shadows pulled too dark around the eyes. The canvas was worn, edges fraying. It looked old, maybe antique. Something about it struck me. I don't know why, but I hated the idea of it sitting there with the trash. I took it upstairs with me, propped it against the wall in the corner of my living room. I told myself it added character, that it gave the place some charm. The first time it whispered, I thought it was coming from outside. I was on the couch, half watching TV, when I heard my name spoken low and hoarse. Just once. Anna. I muted the television, but there was nothing else, just silence. The next night, it spoke again. Not my name this time, something else. It told me my neighbor upstairs, the one who smiled too wide whenever we passed in the hall, had been coming into my apartment while I was away. I laughed at the thought, but it lingered in the back of my mind. I started checking my things when I got home, and, strangely, I did notice differences. A book moved on the shelf. The window latch unlocked when I was sure I'd closed it. The whispers grew more insistent, telling me I was being watched, that I was never truly alone. One night, I woke up to the sound of the portrait murmuring steadily in the living room. My bedroom door was closed, but I could hear it clearly, as though the painting were pressed against my ear. The voice told me that the people around me didn't like me, that I didn't belong there, that even my mother, who called once a week to check on me, only pitied me. They made me angry in ways I didn't recognize. I snapped at coworkers, stopped answering calls from friends. Everyone seemed false, shallow. The portrait fed that anger, stoked it, until the only company I tolerated was the canvas itself. The breaking point came one night when I heard footsteps in the apartment above. Heavy, deliberate. The portrait told me he was there again. The neighbor, moving his furniture so he could drill holes into the floor, watching me from above. I went upstairs, pounding on his door until my fists ached. When he finally opened, bleary-eyed, I screamed at him, accused him of spying, of breaking into my home. He stared at me like I was insane. Maybe I was, by then. The next morning, I carried the portrait outside. I couldn't bear to have it in the apartment another second. I set it by the curb, next to the garbage bins, and walked away without looking back. That night was the first I slept through without waking, but the damage had already been done. My neighbor avoided me after that. My friends had drifted. My mother still called, but I didn't have much to say anymore. Sometimes, I wonder if it was right. If everyone around me was just pretending, waiting to laugh when I turned my back. The portrait whispered so convincingly, I still can't tell where its lies ended and my own doubts began. Account 3. I didn't buy the portrait. I didn't even want it. It came to me through a friend who was moving cross-country and didn't want to haul too much with him. He said, "You like weird old stuff, don't you? Take it. Otherwise, it's going in the trash." I should have let him throw it out. This was in 2021. I hung it in my study, above the little desk where I worked remote most days. The face was unsettling, sure, but I told myself it was atmospheric, something to give the room a little personality. I was into oddities, after all. The first whisper came a few weeks later. At first, I thought it was my wife calling from another room. The portrait said, "She doesn't trust you." I laughed at myself, shook it off. Just my imagination filling the silence. But then it kept happening. Always when I was alone in the study, working late at night. The voice never shouted. It was always soft, measured, as though it was sharing something confidential. It told me things about the people I loved. That my wife had grown tired of me. That my brother was still bitter over something I'd said years ago. That my best friend avoided my calls because he couldn't stand me anymore. I tried to ignore it, but once the words were planted, I couldn't stop thinking about them. Every glance, every hesitation in conversation, every pause on the phone, I second-guessed it all. My wife and I started fighting. Over nothing at first, but always circling back to the same poisonous idea as she was hiding something from me. One night, I actually shouted the portrait's words back at her. She froze, then asked how I could believe such things. I didn't know how to answer. The worst part was, the painting never lied outright. It twisted things, took real small insecurities and stretched them until they filled the room. It knew exactly where to press. One evening, I sat at the desk staring at it, and I swear the portrait's mouth moved. Just the faintest curl of a lip, like it was amused. And then I heard laughter. low and broken, like it was struggling to contain itself. That was the last straw. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell anyone. I took it down from the wall, wrapped it in an old bedsheet, and drove out past the city to the river. It was close to midnight. I parked by the bank, carried the thing to the edge, and threw it as far as I could into the dark water. The splash was small, almost disappointing. For a moment, I thought it might float, but the canvas sank quickly, the black water swallowing it whole. I stood there long after it was gone, just to be sure. The night was dead quiet, except for the ripple of the current. I told myself it was over, that I'd buried the poison where it couldn't reach anyone again. But sometimes, in the stillest hours of the night, I wake up thinking I hear it again, that faint whisper, curling around my name, as if the portrait didn't sink, as if it only moved deeper, waiting for someone else to come along. I closed my notes after that last account, though the words stayed with me long into the night. A portrait that feeds on doubt, that whispers until it turns affection into suspicion, love into hate. It is the sort of story I would have dismissed once. Not anymore. The man swore he had thrown it into the river, swore he had watched it sink and vanish. Yet even he admitted the voice lingered in his thoughts, long after the canvas was gone. I can't help but wonder if the water was truly enough to bury it. Paint and wood rot, but something like this, it feels harder to drown. Perhaps it waits still, in the silt and the shadows, for the next pair of hands to lift it back into the light. Until then, I suppose, the river keeps it secret. If this sort of thing keeps you up at night, you might want to subscribe. There's always more buried in the archives. And if there's a story you're looking for, drop it in the comments. Odds are, I've already got a file with your name on it, just haven't dusted it off yet.